Life in Salem village in 1692 was hard and strict. The people who lived there were called Puritans. They had come from England to build a new life in America. Their world was small and tightly knit, a place where everyone knew everyone else's business. They believed deeply in God and the devil. For them, the world was a constant battleground between good and evil. They saw signs of God's will in good harvests and signs of the devil's work in every misfortune, from a sick cow to a child's sudden fever. Their days were filled with hard work, from farming the rocky soil to attending long church services. The community was isolated, surrounded by a vast and dark forest. This wilderness was mysterious and frightening to them. They believed it could hide unseen dangers, both natural and supernatural. Winters were long, cold and dark, forcing families to spend much of their time indoors. This closeness could lead to tension and disagreements among neighbors. Arguments over land, money or social status were common. These disputes simmered beneath the surface of their orderly society, creating an environment ripe for suspicion and blame when things inevitably went wrong. Religion was the center of everything in Salem. The Puritans followed a very strict set of rules for how to live. They believed that only a select few were chosen by God for salvation and everyone else was destined for damnation. This belief created a constant anxiety among the villagers. They were always looking for signs that they were among the saved. Any deviation from the norm, any strange behavior or personal misfortune could be interpreted as a sign of God's displeasure or, even worse, the devil's influence. This constant spiritual pressure made people watchful and judgmental of one another. Life was also filled with real dangers that they could not easily explain. Diseases like smallpox and diphtheria could sweep through the village, killing many people, especially children. Crop failures could lead to starvation during the harsh winters. These events were terrifying, and without modern science to explain them, the Puritans turned to their faith. They saw the devil as a real and active force in their daily lives, a powerful enemy who was always looking for ways to tempt and destroy them. This belief system set the stage for the terrible events that were about to unfold. The fear of witches began in the cold winter of 1692, inside the home of Reverend Samuel Parris. His 9-year-old daughter, Betty, and his 11-year-old niece, Abigail Williams, started acting strangely. They would scream, throw things, and contort their bodies into bizarre positions. They complained of being pinched and pricked by invisible forces. The local doctor, William Griggs, could find no physical cause for their strange behavior. He gave a diagnosis that was both medical and spiritual for the time. The girls were bewitched. This was a terrifying conclusion, but it was one that the Puritan mind was prepared to accept. The idea of witchcraft was not new to the people of Salem. They had brought these beliefs with them from Europe, where witch hunts had been happening for centuries. They believed that certain people, called witches, could make a pact with the devil. In exchange for their souls, witches were given supernatural powers to harm others. They could cause illness, kill livestock, and create chaos in the community. The Bible itself seemed to support this belief, with verses that commanded, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." For the Puritans, the devil was a real enemy, and witches were his human soldiers. The strange afflictions of Betty Parris and Abigail Williams soon began to spread to other young women in the village. Ann Putnam Jr., Mercy Lewis, and others started showing the same disturbing symptoms. The village was gripped by a growing sense of panic. The afflicted girls were pressured by the town's magistrates, Jonathan Corwin and John Hathorne, to name who was tormenting them. Under intense questioning, the girls finally pointed their fingers at 3 women. They accused Tituba, Reverend Parris's enslaved woman from the Caribbean, Sarah Good, a homeless beggar, and Sarah Osborne, an elderly woman who rarely attended church. These first 3 accused women were easy targets. They were outsiders in the community and did not have the power or social standing to defend themselves effectively. Sarah Good and Sarah Osborne maintained their innocence, but Tituba, perhaps under duress or in an attempt to save herself, confessed. She told the magistrates fantastic stories about flying on a broomstick and meeting with the devil in the woods. She also claimed that there were other witches in Salem working with her. Her confession was like throwing fuel on a fire. It seemed to confirm everyone's worst fears. Salem was under attack by a conspiracy of witches. Tituba's vivid confession turned suspicion into full-blown hysteria. Suddenly, the threat was no longer just a few isolated individuals. It was a hidden network of evil, a coven of witches secretly living among the good people of Salem. The afflicted girls, now seen as victims and seers, became the center of attention. They continued to name more and more people, and their accusations grew bolder. The list of the accused expanded beyond social outcasts to include respected members of the community. People who had once been seen as upstanding and pious were now suspected of being servants of the devil. The accusations created a wave of terror that washed over the entire county. No one was safe. A simple disagreement with a neighbor could lead to an accusation of witchcraft. If someone's cow got sick after an argument, the other person might be accused of casting a spell. People began to look at their friends and neighbors with suspicion and fear. The social fabric of the community, already strained by internal conflicts, began to completely unravel. The very bonds that held the Puritan world together, faith, family, and community, were now being used as weapons in this growing panic. The afflicted girls' performances in the public examinations were dramatic and convincing to the onlookers. When an accused person entered the room, the girls would scream and fall to the floor, writhing in agony as if they were being tortured. They claimed to see the spectre or spirit form of the accused person tormenting them. This spectral evidence was considered valid proof in court. If an accused person recited the Lord's Prayer, any stumble or mistake was seen as proof that they were in league with the devil. The atmosphere was charged with emotion, making it nearly impossible for anyone to think clearly or question what was happening. As the number of accused grew, the jails in Salem and nearby towns began to overflow. People were arrested based on nothing more than the dramatic claims of the young accusers. The hysteria fed on itself. To save themselves from being hanged, some of the accused began to confess to witchcraft. Like Tituba, they found that confessing and naming others was a way to avoid execution. This created a terrible cycle. Each new confession seemed to prove that the witch hunt was justified, which in turn led to more accusations and more arrests, spreading the madness far beyond the borders of Salem village. The trials that followed were honestly a mockery of justice. In May of 1692, Governor William Phips established a special court of oyer and terminer, meaning to hear and determine to handle the flood of witchcraft cases. The court was presided over by judges like William Stoughton, who, firmly believed in the reality of witchcraft and the guilt of the accused. The legal process was heavily biased against the defendants from the very beginning. They were considered guilty until proven innocent, which was a nearly impossible task when the main evidence against them was spectral and could not be seen by anyone but their accusers. The accused were not allowed to have lawyers to help them defend themselves. They were forced to stand alone before their accusers and the powerful magistrates. The girls' dramatic fits and screams in the courtroom were often taken as undeniable proof of the defendant's guilt. When the accused tried to speak in their own defense, their words were twisted or ignored. If they denied the charges, the girls would often cry out in more intense pain, claiming the witch's spectre was attacking them right there in the courtroom. Under such intense psychological pressure, it was, incredibly difficult for the accused to maintain their composure, and any sign of anger or frustration was seen as further evidence of their evil nature. Between June and September of 1692, the court handed down one guilty verdict after another. The first person to be executed was Bridget Bishop, who was hanged on Gallows Hill on June 10th. Over the next few months, 18 more people followed her to the gallows, 19 in total, all professing their innocence to the end. One elderly farmer, Giles Corey, refused to enter a plea of guilty or not guilty. As punishment, he was subjected to a horrific torture called pressing, where heavy stones were placed on his chest until he was crushed to death. Several other people died in the squalid, overcrowded prisons while awaiting trial. By the autumn of 1692, some influential leaders, including the minister Increase Mather, began to publicly question the trials, especially the use of spectral evidence. Governor Phips, whose own wife was eventually accused, finally stepped in. He ordered a halt to the proceedings of the special court and later pardoned the remaining accused. The hysteria slowly subsided, leaving the community devastated and really deeply ashamed. In the years that followed, many involved in the trials, including some of the accusers and judges, issued public apologies. The colony officially apologized and offered financial compensation to the victims' families, but the damage was irreversible. The Salem witch trials serve as a powerful and chilling lesson about the dangers of fear, extremism, and injustice. It shows what can happen when a community allows irrational fear to overpower reason and compassion. The people of Salem were afraid of the devil, but they were also afraid of their neighbors, of uncertainty, and of the unknown. This fear, combined with a rigid and intolerant belief system, created a fertile ground for mass hysteria. It teaches us that when a group scapegoats a minority or an outsider for its problems, terrible consequences can follow. It is a stark reminder to always question authority and to challenge popular opinion when it seems unjust. The events of 1692 also highlight the absolute importance of a fair and just legal system. The accused in Salem were denied the basic rights that we now consider essential for a fair trial. They had no legal counsel, they were presumed guilty, and the evidence used against them was subjective and impossible to disprove. The trials demonstrate that justice cannot exist without due process, clear rules of evidence, and the protection of individual rights. The principle of innocent until proven guilty is a direct legacy of learning from such historical tragedies. We must always safeguard these legal principles to prevent such a miscarriage of justice from ever happening again. Furthermore, the story of the Salem witch trials is a cautionary tale about the power of words and accusations. The entire tragedy was set in motion by the words of a few young girls, and it was fueled by confessions extracted under pressure and the gossip and rumors that spread like wildfire. It shows how easily reputations can be destroyed and lives ruined by false allegations, especially in an environment of fear and suspicion. This lesson is incredibly relevant today, in an age of social media where information and misinformation can spread around the world in an instant. It urges us to be responsible and critical thinkers. Finally, the Salem witch trials compel us to look at the darkness within human nature and society. It is a story of how ordinary people in certain circumstances can do extraordinary evil. The judges, ministers, and jurors were not all monsters. They were people who believed they were doing God's work by ridding their community of evil. This tragic episode in American history forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about conformity, groupthink, and the willingness of people to persecute others in the name of righteousness. The ultimate lesson from Salem is one of humility and the need for tolerance, critical thinking, and a steadfast commitment to justice for all.